With Germany launching Bremen and Europe into service, the United States and its shipping companies did not want to be left behind in the shipbuilding race. Cunard Line, Historia's biggest rival, began construction on the 75,000-ton ocean liner in 1928. While Historia planned a 74,000-ton unnamed ship, top ocean designer in America later planned the construction of the Usada. The Usada went on construction on the day the SS Pinnacle was launched, on November 15, 1929, and a keel was laid down. The new ship improved on its luxurious and comfortness, while adding experience and more time for passengers to spend on the still constructing Usada. It had ballrooms, luxurious cafeterias, and a walkway to breathe the air. She was to be designed as large to take the role as the largest ship from the RMS Majestic. On March 5, 1929, he was launched, but on October 24th, and then he was fitted with her engines, funnels, equipment, and masts. Because of the start of the Great Depression, work was halted to a significant amount. But on late 1930s, work on the Usada was finally finished. On September 20, 1930, his maiden voyage commenced, carrying famous and wealthy people on board. The passengers staggered up to 2,500 passengers and crew, almost filling Usada up. Large ships like the Usada had no port intended for them. It would be until 1930s, massive docks were finally built. His passengers rode on traditional tenders to get them into the ship. The Usada later departs on his voyage, his engines roaring to life. It was also the first ever Historia-class vessel to have four steam turbines. The Usada's inaugural journey was a transatlantic crossing, departing from Southampton, England, and arriving in New York City on September 26th. During this voyage, passengers indulged in lavish dining, extravagant entertainment, and exceptional service, solidifying the ship's reputation as a pinnacle of luxury. Throughout 1931, the Usada offered exclusive cruise voyages to the Caribbean, treating passengers to crystal-clear waters and vibrant island cultures. On 1933, Usada circumnavigated the globe in 115 days, picking up influential and wealthy people around the world, delivering famous paintings, artifacts, and even the President of the United States. On 1935, the SS Usada was later surpassed by the Normandy in overall size and capacity. Usada was still, however, luxurious than ever before, but he wouldn't be as popular as his early years after the launch of the Normandy, however. During the 1st of September 1939, Usada was heading to Southampton. It was at least halfway through its journey. SS Usada was already on his 282nd transatlantic crossing. He had carried along 200,000 passengers throughout his pre-Second World War career, and at arrival on New York City, he would be transferred into an exclusive hotel and museums ship to improve cheerfulness during the war. Usada was even customized with more decorations and wonders. He was the perfect American ocean liner. But on 1944, tragedy struck as one prestigious ocean liner, the Manhattan, sank in confrontation with German battleships. Usada was demanded to be fitted as auxiliary cruiser, but he was upgraded to the brim. The most notable upgrade towards the Usada was his engines, replaced with a steam turbine boosting the ship to 25 knots. Usada was also given the special gray tint with a tactable smoke screen. On his first military voyage, he carried along with him 9,000 troops, heading to the now liberated France. On February 3, 1945, a U-530 was patrolling the English Channel when the crew overheard a massive vessel sound and submerged underwater. The ship was later figured out to be the Usada. Germans were confused as they already sunk the ship, but whatever it was, the U-530 was determined to sink. The U-530 continued on the attack while looking at its periscope through the dense fog. But when looking back at the periscope, they lost sight of the ship. The Usada outran the U-530 before it could even attack. The Usada later made it to Le Havre safe and sound without apparent damages. On February 5, 1945, the Usada arrives at Le Havre with 6,000 American troops. Many was happy to ride the SS Usada, once was a luxurious ship. Usada would stay at Le Havre for 10 days until she would carry American troops back home on February 16. On the early morning of the 16th, escort of Junkers through 88 prepares for their campaign in bombing the French lands to slow down the Allies. Loaded with 500 tons of bombs and ammunition, the squadrons take off from their base of Flensburg on 5 o'clock. The same morning, the SS Usada took off from Le Havre carrying 6,000 troops. Somewhere on the English Channel on 8 o'clock in the morning, the squadron of bombers spot a massive troop ship sailing in a dense fog. Thinking it's the best time to attack, the Germans sweep in for the attack. But the Usada had already found the Germans, and they were preparing to defend the ship with all their life. Usada was usually transported with the destroyers, but none of them were active. Usada was on his own. The Usada started to activate the zigzags maneuver, in hopes to at least dodge some bombs. On 8/15, a torpedo bomber attacked the Usada, and said it was easily thwarted. Another bomb came from the port side and destroyed more anti-aircraft. Usada desperately attempts to evade the bombs. 8/19, the torpedo were aimed directly towards the Usada. The first time of the second hit directly in the center of the Usada. On 8/22, a bomber comes crashing down into the bridge. I raised the message, though the captain survives at the skin of his teeth. 8/25, another explosion came from the diving bombers and hit directly in the third funnel of the Usada, causing it to collapse and boiler explosions to occur below. On 8/30, the last hit came from the Usada as it hit directly in an ammunition depot, causing successive explosions to occur. The bombing lasted for 43 minutes. Amazingly, the SS Usada was still afloat, but it was a dead floating ship, and the fire could not be contained until 10 a.m. The destroyer Eagle later picked up the survivors on board the Usada, and they would plan on towing back the ship to Southampton after the end of the war. Usada stood outside the Bay of Southampton for 5 months, until a storm dragged the ship onto coastal waters and beaching itself. His wreck was ignored and neglected until on the 1st of August 1945, Usada was towed by the massive RMS Queen Mary, alongside tow ships, and brought to Liverpool. On the early 1946, Usada stayed in Liverpool being maintained. He did gain a little bit of rest. Usada was later transported all the way to the United States for repairs. Historia could not repair Usada all the way as Historia was lacking the necessary funds to repair Usada. Instead, his design would be reconstructed, but this time smaller yet faster. On December 1946, the refit of Usada began. She was lengthened, all three funnels were remade and was modernized amidships. This gave the ship the distinction of the new era of the company. As rebuilt, he was now assessed at 65,820 gross registered tons. He had added lifeboats, safety features, and a more modernized deck. But the public did not like the new appearance of Usada despite the added features on the ship. But the Usada still kept his speed of 25 knots, but this still did not go into the public's favor. On October 21, 1947, the Usada was launched back again into the ocean, and his first voyage would be on November 12, 1947. Usada's fame was stolen by the SS Pinnacle, and now the Usada was losing more than passengers. Usada was not known anymore for his fame. Instead, he was known as the luxury line turned ocean liner. Usada did still carry the wealthy, but many were simply just to get across the Atlantic much faster in a luxurious ride. 5 years onwards, the Usada continued his transatlantic voyages without any serious problems, but it was note to mention that the Usada had become obsolete. The ships of the 1950s was much more classy, luxurious, in which Usada just can't compare to. On 1950, Usada had its first ever refit ever since its reconstruction, which only updated the safety features on the ship and modified it. On his 422nd voyage, the Usada had entered a rough storm. The storm lasted till the night, but they never realized the fire had simmered during when the storm reached its maximum. The fire started small, but worked its way up to the upper decks and eventually had to be placed out by several ships. The Usada lifted heavily to port, but after the fire had already been placed out, the Usada was then repaired back to New York. On 1956, Usada's voyages had dropped. Many blamed it was the traditional design that made Usada look weak, but it was the newly airplanes that had already made every ocean liner look slow and unpopular. On 1959, the Usada completed his last voyage on September, and after was sold for scrapping in New York on November 1. Usada was sold for at least $2 million. All of the captains that had ever drove the Usada came together and drove it to the yard. Usada had carried more than 8.5 million passengers and had traveled thousands of miles. He was nicknamed the Tiffany of the Seas. His nickname would become unpopular, and in 2000,